CMC.
There's a cup holder up here. I'm Sam, and I'm a crystal meth addict and an alcoholic. There's a lot of meth in my story, but thank you for easing the crowd into that. I appreciate it. I've been sober since September 23rd of 2013. Today is January 23rd, so that means that tonight I have 7 years, 4 months, and 7 hours and 6 minutes sober, which I'm super grateful for. So when Patrick asked me to speak, I said yes. And also, I didn't tell Patrick something. Twice this year, I was asked to share my story. And the first time I was asked to share, it was for one of the California groups on Zoom, and I bombed. Like, I really bombed. Like that fear that you have when someone asks you to speak, and you're like, okay, but I'm really kind of nervous. I don't want to forget my entire story and how I got sober and where I grew up. And I did that. So I got about 10 minutes into my story, and I lost my complete train of thought. But then the second time I was asked to speak, I did it. I got through my whole story. I even got sober, and then I got to share the solution. So I figured tonight there's a 50-50 chance that I'll get through everything that I wanted to say tonight, and I brought some notes just to keep me on track. So thank you for inviting me here tonight. It's a great pleasure. The first time I was asked to speak ever, I was super nervous, and they said it's just like you're talking to a group of friends, and that's really how it feels, and I'm fortunate to be friends with a lot of the folks in here. I'm originally from Houston, Texas, just like Beyonce, and I grew up exactly like Beyonce, actually. I grew up in the suburbs of Houston. If anyone knows anything about Houston, it's a big city. I grew up on the southeastern edge of town in the suburbs, just deep in a marshy suburb of Houston. And at the time, I felt like I lived in what I would say was a pretty average family. I'm the oldest. I have a younger sister, a half-sister, and I grew up with my mom and my stepdad from the time that I was very, very young. And we lived on the end of a cul-de-sac. I lived right next to the elementary school that I went to school at. And no one in my household drank. No one in my household used drugs. Dad went to work and came home at the end of the day, and no one yelled. There was no fighting. Like, I had a really calm childhood for the most part. What I found out later, after I got sober and I reconnected with my family in a new way, is I learned that just because that's what my household looked like, that wasn't what my family looked like. I have alcoholism on my mom's side. My grandparents were alcoholics that fought tooth and nail. I have cousins who were crystal meth addicts just like I was, and alcoholics, and so I come by it honestly. But at the time, it was kind of hard to understand why, why this one kid ended up in trouble all the time. So when the book talked about the story about putting your hand over the hot stove, that was me. That was my childhood, and that was a lot of my adulthood. I was always that kid who was putting his hand over the hot stove, saying it's not going to burn me, and I'll show you. And I didn't really like to have a lot of rules, and there was a lot of secretly misbehaving. And so as I got to high school, middle school, I snuck my first drink of alcohol when I was probably about 9 years old. My parents, who weren't really drinkers, had a stash of liquor they kept on the top shelf of the pantry behind all the cereal boxes. So I climbed up there one night when they were gone, and I snuck down a bottle that they had brought back from their honeymoon in Mexico. And so it wasn't labeled, but it was covered in like buckskin and like leather and had like a medallion on it. I don't really even know what was in there, but I was like, this is the one. And I popped the cork off the top of it, and I poured it into a glass, and I shot it. I was like, drink the alcohol. And it was horrible. And I immediately was like, I've made a huge mistake. It tasted awful. But the excitement and the thrill of getting my hands on something like that was really exciting. And I remembered that moment for a really long time. So in middle school, when my friends we all started getting hormones, and my guy friends started being attracted to girls, and I wasn't really feeling that kind of way. And so this kind of added to that feeling of being kind of an outsider and feeling not quite so connected. And my middle school experience was the first time that I just clearly remember feeling disconnected from the people that were around me. I felt disconnected from my peer group. And I didn't exactly know why I felt that way. I just knew that that's how I felt. I got to high school my freshman year. By this time, my friend group of guys, turns out none of them were gay, much to my dismay. And it was just me, right? So I was the only one. And so I drifted away from this group, but during that time, there was a lot of ridicule. It was called faggot. I was also called abomination. I don't know who uses the word abomination, unless somebody who has a lot of, someone with a lot of church background, which I had too. We went to an evangelical, full gospel church. So, what I learned during that time was that I learned that Jesus loves me and that fags go to hell. So I just had to keep all of that stuff to myself. And with this distancing from my peer group, I started looking for a new group of friends. And so I started looking to people that I thought I could fit in easily with. And I was fortunate. I went to a pretty big school, and I started hanging out with the kids who were smoking pot before class, before they came to school. And I decided this was going to be my peer group. And the great thing about this group was they didn't judge me at all. They didn't care where I came from. They didn't care how I dressed. They just wanted to hang out and get high and drink. And that's what I wanted to do. So by my freshman, sophomore year of high school, I start skipping school. I'm smoking pot in a white van in the mornings on the way to school with some friends of mine who have a boyfriend who's old enough to have a white van, I guess, and nowhere else to be during the week. So I spent a lot of mornings riding in the big white van, smoking some dope, and then going into class and doing really poorly, but thought I was having a good time. And so before long, though, that progressed because I was hanging out with these kids who were some of them were older than me, and before you know it, I was hanging out with like grown-ups. Like on the weekend, I was like find myself like in Galveston at like a trap house on the weekend. Like it just escalated really quickly for me. Like soon I was around 30-year-olds, and I was 16. We were all just kind of hanging out and getting high and drinking some really cheap beer, and I thought this was great. I didn't really see anything wrong with this. So my craving for drugs and alcohol, not that I was like craving the drugs and craving the alcohol, but I was craving the feeling that it gave me whenever I got it. Whenever I got whatever it was, whether it was Milwaukee's Best or whether it was some good pot or whatever it was, I wanted that escape. I wanted that feeling of not having to worry about what anyone else was thinking or how well I did or didn't fit in. And so that kind of became my pursuit. So I still looked like a really good kid. Like I kind of dressed like I do now. Like I kind of was this kind of sort of preppy looking kid, hanging out with a bunch of kids who were like already dropped out of school, and the guy with the white van. And I didn't really look like I fit in with them, which was fine. That was kind of my modus operandi. I'm just I'm going to look like I'm a good kid, and I'm going to go put my hand over the hot stove every chance I get. And before long, I turned 16. I got a car, which was really exciting, and that gave me a lot more freedom. I could really go anywhere at this point. But this time I had found LSD, which was really fun. I found some psychedelics. I'd found cocaine. I don't know where a 16-year-old finds cocaine, but I did. I actually had a summer job. I worked at a dry cleaner's. This was so I could make some money to pay for my car and pay for my insurance. And while I was there, I found out that somebody they're like, he's like cocaine. And I was like, well, I want some of that. So I asked him. I gave the guy a ride home from our job at the dry cleaners, and one night, and I said, hey, I hear you sell cocaine. And he's like, yeah. So I scored some. Coke. 16. I was really proud of myself, and I didn't really know what to do with it because I wasn't the kind of drinker yet who needed a bump to get through the night. But I was willing to try anything that would give me that rush and that excitement and that feeling, of sense of relief and connection again. So it was a lot of fun, right? And unfortunately, something happened, and I got busted. I'll tell you how I got busted. Is that back in this is the early '90s. We had a camcorder we took to some parties, and we were like, haha, this is great, we're going to get all this stuff, good stuff on film. And I don't know why we ever thought that was a good idea. It was probably the drinking and the drugs. But so I was carrying around this camcorder with me to these events, and then my mom found this tape in the camcorder, and it was all me and my friends hanging out partying, smoking a bunch of pot with a bunch of grown-ups, and riding in the van and all this kind of stuff. And so I got really, really busted. It wasn't like I could lie and get out of this. They actually saw me doing these things because I was an idiot and I had a camcorder, and it was a lot of effort to carry a camcorder to a party. That's my story. It was all on VHS. So my dad sat me down on the couch and he said, "Have you been doing drugs?" I was like, "No, sir." And he pulls out this VHS cassette, and I was like, "It's over. I'm busted." So my parents called a counselor to help their 16-year-old son. What do we do with our 16-year-old son? He's doing cocaine and LSD, and he's driving around. We don't know where. He's going off in his car, and he's drinking on the weekends, and he's smoking a bunch of pot, and we don't know who these people are that he's hanging out with, and we need to get him some help. And so they brought this counselor in, and she sat me down alone, and she said, "Sam, what do you think we should do?" And I said, "Well, I definitely think I should be grounded." And she said, "Your best decision making got you here." That was the first time I was told that. And she said, "You're going to inpatient treatment. And when you get out of inpatient treatment, you're going to go to a meeting every single day." So it was 90 and 90. I didn't know that's what it was. It was 90 and 90. So I was going to go to inpatient treatment, and I was going to do 90 and 90. And it didn't matter what I thought, because my best decisions had gotten me here. And I was also grounded later. I did also get grounded. That happened too. So they sent me to Rafa Treatment Center in Houston. It is a faith-based treatment center. I was in the children's unit because I was only 16. There were kids in there much younger than myself, and all the way up through 18, and then 18 and up, you were in the adult unit. And I spent about 2 weeks there. When I was at Rafa Treatment Center, it wasn't 12-step based, but the idea was that we were going to, they were going to get these kids off drugs, straighten them up, and get them back in school. And during that time, I had one goal, which was to go home. So I would tell you whatever you wanted to hear from me. I would, show up on time. I would color in all my coloring books. I would do the schoolwork that they sent to me because I wanted to go home. And I really wasn't interested in being sober or quitting drugs, or all I wanted to get back to was my friends and the life that I had kind of created for myself. And the other thing that happened during that time was, as scared as I was to have been found out, I really felt like, my life is over. I was deep inside, the one thing I was really grateful for was that no one knew my big secret, which was that I was gay. And I got out of my stint at treatment. I kind of had some street cred now. I'm like, I went to rehab, no big deal. And I went back to school, but I didn't hang out with those kids anymore. I was like really grounded. This was the first time I lost a car to my alcoholism and addiction. At 16, the first car came and went in a period of about 6 months. The car was gone. And I was grounded, and I did stay sober. I didn't go back to that friend group. And so for the next few years, I didn't do any drugs or alcohol. I actually got into a really good group of kids in school, finished school, made an attempt at starting college. And my first job out of high school, I was working at a private Christian school. I worked there for 3 years, and I was trying to pray the gay away. I was the assistant fine arts director at a private Christian school. The praying the gay away didn't work. But it was a really good place for a young man who was really uncomfortable with his own sexuality, had this really kind of complicated history of drugs and alcohol, and I thought, this is a good, safe place to hang out for a while. I'll do this. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, either way, those prayers were not answered. I'm still a huge homosexual. But after 3 years, I decided that I could no longer work there anymore. I was in so much conflict with who I was and what was being reinforced in this really conservative environment. And so I left. And I will say this, just like I had been brought up in this evangelical, full gospel church environment, which had a lot of good things about it, and it had some really harmful things about it for me. This school that I worked at was kind of the same way. It was a very, very conservative environment. I was actually known as Brother Clark. Brother Clark, good to see you, sir. But this was also really not a healthy environment for me there. But it did bring me closer to God than I had been in a long time. As flawed as that concept of God was at that time, because it was really based on a set of rules more than a relationship, but it still brought me closer to my higher power. When I left there, I decided I was taking my life back. I was about to turn 21, and I was tired of working at the church school. The gay was not being prayed away, so I'm just going to go take my life back. And I did that, and I got a boyfriend, because that's what you do. And this boyfriend was someone who said, we went on a date, and then I stayed the night, and then I stayed the weekend, and then I lived there. Anyone else done that? Is it just me? Am I the only one who's done that? So then I lived there. And after I've lived there for a while, and we're having a great time, and he says, hey, there's something you should know. I think I'm addicted to cocaine. And I said, well, that's fine, because I'm not. So this is not going to be a problem for us. And in addition to the drinking, every once in a while, the cocaine would come around. And much to my surprise, he didn't just like to snort it, but he was an IV user. So I said, well, I guess that's how we're going to do this. So within about 6 months of me deciding that I was going to take my life back and stepping away from my really conservative environment working at the Christian school where I was Brother Clark, I had a needle in my arm. That was not my plan, but that was my reality. That was what actually happened. My best decision-making got me there. So I didn't stay with that person, and I didn't continue to be an IV user, fortunately, after that. Really grateful for that. But that experience was really, it was confusing for me, because I was like, I couldn't help but think, how did I get here? How did I get here doing this? I don't even like this. But I'm doing it, and I'm not saying no, and frankly, none of the people around me are saying no either. So I got out of that tumultuous relationship, and there was a series of other relationships that were, equally crazy. And then when I had been sent to that rehab the first time and got out and I did that 90 and 90, one of the things that happened was that 90 and 90 started, my schedule was Mondays were 12-step meetings. And so that was my first introduction to AA. My first introduction to the 12 steps was that 90 and 90. And when I went to that group, I was the youngest person there by far. Most of the people in there were comfortably middle-aged. There was a wonderful woman from Germany who had a thick accent. There was a guy who couldn't stop doing heroin. And there was another guy who had given away his car one weekend on a bender. And I thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. How do you just lose your car? But he'd lost his car. And so I didn't connect with any of these people. I was like, it just confirmed for me that I'm really not like you. I'm just a guy trying to have a good time. So as I got well into my 20s, the problems continued with the drugs and alcohol. I got into some more tumultuous relationships, and I finally found someone who introduced me to a lot more drugs and alcohol. I kind of got into this whole party scene. I kind of became this circuit kid, and I did some fun parties all over the place. And I thought again I was having a really good time. And this is when some more drugs came in, some drugs that I had never done before, things I hadn't had in my past. And at some point during this time, there was a day, like a bright sunny day, where I had I had this conscious decision in my head that said, I think I'm just going to do some meth. I think I'm just going to do some meth. Like, I'm not feeling great today. It's like the middle of the week. Normally I just do this stuff on the weekends to go out and have some fun, but I'm like, maybe I'm just going to do a little of this now. And I did. And that kind of continued. I actually thought I had found an even better solution. I thought I found an even better solution to, ordering the double at the bar and then getting the party started. I thought I'd found a solution that was even stronger than all of my other solutions. And at some point, I found myself in a relationship with someone who was also an addict and an alcoholic like I was, and he got sober. This was a huge surprise to me. He got sober. He called and said, "I'm going to go to a meeting," and I was like, "A meeting?" I was like, "I know what they do there. You don't want to go to that." And he said, "No, I need to go to a meeting." And he said, "If you want to come to one with me, you can." And I said, "Well, okay, I'll support you in that." And I really thought that he was inviting me to be his support. I was like, I'm going to be a good boyfriend. I'm going to go support you in your new journey, to your meetings. And so I went to one meeting, and I walked into the group, into the room, and you guys welcomed me, and you said, "We're glad you're here." And I was like, I'm not here for me. I'm here for him. I'm here for this guy. And but I sat in the circle, and I heard some things that I couldn't unhear. And I was physically shaken by what the message that you guys had. Because when I walked into that room, I couldn't bullshit you guys. There was nothing that I could do to hide the truth about who and what I was. You knew exactly who and what I was. And I left that meeting, and I said, I'm never doing that again. Never doing that again. And I went back home with my then partner, and we had the smashing of the pipes ceremony. If you're just an alcoholic, I apologize if you're not familiar with this story, but this is the smashing of the pipes. It's a beautiful ceremony. It's full of tears. The book describes the solemn oath that is taken, a solemn oath is taken. It's probably very similar to when you pour out the last bottle of booze, except then you have broken glass in your shoe at the end. And I was like, we're done. And maybe we were for a minute. This wasn't the first time we'd had the smashing of the pipes ceremony at our house. But what was different this time is that he came to a 12-step meeting, and he got a sponsor, and he got a book, and he started working the program. And what I did is I said, I know what that's about, and I don't need that. And I decided to do it on my own. And I lasted about 2.5 weeks. And after 2.5 weeks, I was crazy. Like, I was absolutely, there was nothing in this world that was going to prevent me from getting drunk or high again at that point. And so I did, and I spent the next 7.5 months either with drugs or alcohol every single day, because I couldn't stop. And I had seen at that point that I was not capable of living without my solution. On the day before I got sober, my then partner had gone to a meeting at this building. He had gone to the Sunday Morning Live group of AA downstairs in the basement. And I knew that we lived about 10 minutes from this building, and I knew exactly how much time I had to get as loaded as I could possibly get before I had to get out of the house, because I was going to be too fucked up to be around this sober guy. And so I did. I went and ran a bunch of errands. And I got a call that said, "When are you coming home? We need to talk." I'm like, this is not going to be good. So I got home, and and this was the moment. This was the end, right? And he says, "You need to go. You need help, and I can't be the one to help you." And I knew at that point that the jig was up for me, and I found myself at that point backed into a corner where I really had no other options, because what had happened by this point was I had lost several jobs. I had lost a couple of more cars, actually, and I was asking people for money to get my vehicle out of the impound, because the cops had pulled me over again with no inspection and and all that stuff. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so that was the day before. That was the day before my sobriety date. I had done a whole lot of meth that day, so I had a nice crash and burn that night. And the next day was a Monday. And I knew, because I had already visited that 12-step meeting 7 months earlier, I knew where I could go. And so that's what I did. The interesting thing was, on that Monday morning after my dark night of the soul the night before, where I had basically got on my knees and said, I need help, and I don't know what to do. When the sun was up the next morning, by 12 o'clock, I was ready to get loaded again. And I didn't understand that myself, because I had really come to that decision that night before that this had to be the end. And yet here I was thinking about getting loaded one more time. And I actually said, well, there's a meeting on Wednesday, so I could just make Wednesday my day one. Fortunately, I didn't, though, and I got to that Monday meeting. So at this point, I'm sober. I go to this Monday meeting, and I walk in, and you guys say exactly what you said before. You said, we're glad you're here. Keep coming back. And for whatever reason, I believed you. I really believed you. I didn't know why you were saying it, but I knew it was true, because I heard your stories, and I did come back. And I got a sponsor, and I got a big book, and I started on my journey to the steps. Sober. Good night. No, this is actually where the really crazy stuff starts, right? I get into the 12-step meetings, and I get a sponsor. And the funny thing is, I had seen AA years before, right? I'm like, I went to AA, I went to rehab, like, I know all about this stuff, but I didn't. The funny thing about that experience with that first AA group is it met in a church. It met in a fellowship hall in a church, and there was a podium like this one, but it had a cross on the front of it. And I didn't have a big book, and I didn't have a sponsor, and I didn't work a step. So when they were talking about recovery, and they were talking about the big book, and they were telling these stories, and no one told me that the big book was different from the good book, so I thought they were talking about the Bible. I thought this was a Bible. I thought they were talking about, this is recovery, and these are the steps we took, and this is a Bible. And I was like, I don't know what is going on here, because I knew like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, but I didn't know Bob and Bill, and I thought some of their stories, they just didn't make sense, right? There's no Bob and Bill in the gospel. So like, that's what I thought I knew. I thought I knew all about this, this thing you guys have going here. Obviously, I didn't, right? So this time around, I got a Bible, and I got a sponsor, and he took me through this book. And the first thing he did, so he said, get a book, get a notebook, and meet me at Starbucks, because you have to get sober at Starbucks. And I did, and I went to Half Price Books, and I got my book, and I thought I was going to be an A student. I'm like, yeah, I may be 1 week sober, but I got this. And so I opened to chapter 1, and I started reading Bill's story like the night before I was going to meet my sponsor. And it was awful. It was awful. Have you read Bill's story lately? I was like, what? It's a stockbroker in the 30s. World War I. The goose hung high. I'm like, this isn't going to work for me. So I went to that meeting at Starbucks, and I was like, fuck. And he says, well, we don't start there. He said, we're going to back it up, and we're going to read the doctor's opinion today. So let's turn to the X's and the I's. And we read the doctor's opinion. And as we read the doctor's opinion, we got to the point where it said men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And we paused, and we did a little exercise, and he had me do something called Stickman. So maybe some of you have seen Stickman. If you haven't, that's okay. All it is simply a visual illustration of the cycle of addiction. But he drew a little stick figure in the middle of that page, and he started at the top, and he said, what does Stickman want to do? He says, Stickman wants to control and enjoy his drugs and his alcohol. That's what he wants to do. That's what all of us really want to do. And he says, but something happens differently. There's something different about Stickman. When Stickman puts drugs and alcohol into his body, it sets off an allergy that he cannot control. And this sets him off on a spree. Does this sound familiar? I'm like, yeah, I was up for 3 days before I came to my first meeting. And he said, so great. So that sounds familiar. And then he said, so the problem with that Stickman has is once he sets off that allergy and he can't control when he's going to stop, however many days later, inevitably he's going to start racking up some consequences. Have you ever had any consequences? And I was like, yeah, I've had a few. And so I listed off some things, right? Like the cars that I'd lost, the jobs that I'd lost, the relationships that I'd damaged, that STDs that I'd caught, all these things I could just add to this list. And the list could get really long. And he said, that's good. We got a lot of good material here. And he said, so what happens in Stickman's experience is that at some point after he's racked up enough consequences, he's going to get stopped. He's going to, for some reason, whether he's going to get arrested or he's going to run out of dope or he's going to run out of money or whatever's going to happen. Maybe he goes into the hospital, but he's going to get stopped. And on the other side of that getting stopped is like, what did that feel like for you when you were separated from your solution? And I was like, it felt pretty damn bad. And I described to him, I said, when I was separated from my solution because I'd run out of money or my dealer wouldn't call me back or I couldn't buy anything, I drank all the wine coolers out of the fridge or whatever it was going on, I said I felt really awful. I felt like there was this fog that settled down on me and I couldn't function and I was miserable and I was depressed. And I didn't want to be around people, and I was in a really dangerous spot at that point because at that point, I'm getting close to the point where I'm willing to do anything to get drunk or high again. He said, good. He said, that's exactly what we would see. This is what we call the spiritual malady. And he had me write on the page, restless, irritable discontent. And he explained to me that this is my condition 100% of the time when I don't have a solution. And then he went on to say that my mind will start to play tricks on me during this time, and I will eventually find myself saying that it's okay, I've had a break, I'm going to do better this time, I'm going to do meth better this time, or whatever it was, right? I'm not going to spend so much money, or I'm not going to be with those people. And at some point, I'm just going to say fuck it, and I'm going to go get a bottle, or I'm going to go get a pipe, and I'm going to start all over again. And he had me sit with that for a while visually on the page, and then and he said, so, let's keep going, right? And at some point early on, I had a lot of things to say. I had some questions. I had a lot of stories that I thought he'd like to hear. And he was like, no, let's just keep reading. So we did, and eventually we got through the early chapters of the book. For myself, I was like, yeah, okay, I got the step 1, the step 2, you got the God concept. I got a God concept. I went to a full gospel evangelical church. I've prayed the gay away. I know all about the God thing. So step 2, I got that in the bag. Step 2, step 3, we said a prayer. We held hands at Starbucks. It was really embarrassing. Like, I don't really know this guy that well at this point. We've only been working together for about a month or two now. So now we're holding hands and we're praying. And then he said, now, next, we launched into a vigorous course of action. So he opens my book again, and he says, we're going to draw some columns, and you're going to talk about your resentments. You're going to write the list of names of the people that you have these resentments toward, whom you are angry with. If you can't think of anyone, write everyone in your family, write all of your exes, write your employers. If you can add to that list, and I added my credit card companies and the insurance companies and the police department that pulled me over and towed my car away, and I put all that in there. And he said, great, so now that we've described what their offenses were, we're going to talk about how it applied to you, how it affected you. And then lastly, we got to that 4th column where he turned the tables on me, and he said, now let's talk about what your part is in all of this. Next, in step 4, he had me work on my fears. So when I get to this part in my story, this is actually where things got challenging for me. I came into the program in September, and shortly after the holidays, I started getting a little uncomfortable with this process. Sitting down with a spiral notebook at a Starbucks once a week was kind of like, I'm not really sure where we're going with all this. But something happened in that bringing up of those resentments and the fear inventory specifically that really set me off, and I was like, you know what? I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I took a little break. My sponsor, he'd been asking me for a while to learn the third step prayer. So your homework is to go home and learn the third step prayer. And I would be like going to meet him, and I'd be like, yeah, God, something, God, to thee. And he's like, have you learned the prayer yet? And I'm like, yeah, something like God, thee, and thou. And he's like, well, you need to learn the prayer, and you need to be saying this every day. Every day. Learn this prayer, say it every day. And as we got through the fourth step, and I'm kind of petering out, and so I keep showing up without my work done. I don't know if any of you have ever shown up without your work done. And at a certain point, my sponsor took my notebook and he swiveled around. He flipped all the way to the back to the front of the notebook where we had done Stickman those months prior. And he looked at Stickman with me and he said, let's remember that without a solution, we are what? Restless, irritable, and discontent. And we're that way 100% of the time when we don't have a solution. And he closed my notebook and he slid it across the table and he sent me home. And I thought, that was weird. It's a weird way to end a meeting. And I took my break. I was like, I'm not going to go to my meetings so much anymore. I'm not really sure that this is working for me. I don't have a desire to get drunk or high today, but I'm not really sure that this is what I want to do. And what happened was kind of like that bright sunny day where I had decided that meth sounded like a really good idea, where I was like, I'll just do some meth. It's Tuesday. I'll just do a little meth. Get me through the day. I found myself sober, new in the program, and no longer motivated to do what was being asked of me. And it was a bright sunny day again, and I said, I feel like I felt right before meth was a good idea. And I think this is what my sponsor was talking about when he said that I would feel restless, irritable, discontent 100% of the time. And so I had to have an awakening. I had to have what the book calls that spiritual awakening. And I did. I had mine through a series of events. I was about 5 months sober, and I had been using a lot of drugs and alcohol for a very long time. And I've also been HIV positive for a very long time. And during my using career, I had stopped taking medicine. I'd stopped going to the doctor because that just takes away time and resources from my precious drug use. And so I found myself really, really ill. Also because I had been unable to get through this part of my fourth step inventory with my sponsor, I wasn't able to be honest with anyone yet. So I hadn't told anyone how sick I was. And I started having a health crisis. I had stopped going to meetings, and I started having transient ischemic attacks. They call it a mini stroke. And I had these, and I didn't know why I was having them, except I had a good idea it was probably from the AIDS and the meth. So I eventually got to a doctor who treated me and said, you're really sick. And my doctor said, well, I need you to have an emergency MRI, like right now today, because we have the medicine that you need. We have the medicine that you need to make you healthy again. But the problem is you're so sick that we need to look into the deepest parts of you to make sure that there's not something else there that's going to kill you. And so as I sat waiting for my emergency MRI, it occurred to me that what these doctors were trying to do to save my life, where they were looking into the deepest parts of me, or they're looking into my blood, and they're actually going to look into my brain to figure out what the problem was exactly what this program was asking me to do. When my sponsor sat me down at Starbucks and said, I want you to put this inventory together. You need to find a way to be brutally honest, and we're going to work through this together. And I was like, this is exactly what is being asked of me in my recovery. And if I don't do that, I'll die. That's what it took for me to make the connection between the difference between coming and sitting in a chair and not doing the work and not getting honest, that I could still die. And so I came back from my little break, and I went back to the meeting after I had successfully had my brain scanned and had my blood re-examined, and they gave me that powerful medicine that was going to save my life. And I had this thought that said, if I could go back to this meeting, would I go? And I decided the answer was yes. And I found my sponsor, and I said, will you still work with me? He said, uh-huh. So we sat down, and I said, you probably want to know what's different. And I proceeded to tell him in a very, very honest way all the things that I was been unwilling to be honest about up to that point. There were just a lot of things from my past that were really, really difficult for me to put down on paper. And my experience was I needed to tell him some of those things before I could even write them. I needed to sit down and be completely honest with someone so that I could take and put pen to paper and complete that inventory. And I did that. I moved quickly through the rest of my 4-step sex inventory. Yeah, that was fun. And I got through that, and then it was a 5, a 6, and a 7. And at this point, I had gotten the fire lit under me again because I had had this really profound experience that explained to me that I needed to do this program like a dying man. I got through 8 and 9. I started making my amends to my family. I was able to make amends to parents that I had treated really badly when they were driving me to rehab and like dropping me off at the meetings and stuff. I got to make amends for those things, and I got to restore a lot of those relationships. The partner who had tried to get me sober, tried to help me get sober before, I was able to make amends in that relationship now, and I still have a friendship with that person because we're both sober. I got, so 10 and 11 came along, and then 12. So what happened at 12 was my sponsor said, great, now you're going to start raising your hand, and you're going to put your name on that packet, and you're going to put a star next to your name so you can let people know that you're available to sponsor. And I said, I don't know that I remember how to do that. And he said, yeah, you do. You're going to go back to the beginning of the book where we did Stickman, and when you sit down with that person, you're going to open it to the doctor's opinion, and you're going to read the book with them, just like we did. And that's exactly what happened. I said, I'll get one sponsee so I can get this guy off my back. That's all I'm going to do. And a week later, that sponsee showed up. Someone walked up to me after the meeting and said, I'd like to know if you would work with me. And I'm like, yeah, great. So we did. And I'm really fortunate as I've always had someone that I'm working with. Since that first sponsee, I have been really, I'm really grateful for the fact that sponsorship, I was told that this is how we get to keep it, is by giving it away. I have just a couple of minutes left. I don't want to run too long, but I was going to share one more really recent story with you guys. So just recently, I was reminded of something that happened during my first step experience, and it came to me because of someone else who I have worked with a lot, who is going through their first step again. And this person called me after a horrific accident from the hospital and said, "I'm really scared, and would you pray with me? I would like to ask if you would pray for me." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's pray together." And he said, "I don't know if I know how to do that." And I said, "It's okay. We're going to do the Lord's Prayer, and I'll say it, and you can just follow along." And so that's what we did. We started with the Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And we got through the prayer, and I said, I learned that prayer at my 8A meeting that I went to when I was 16. That's where I learned that prayer. When I had my first step experience in 2013, when I was backed into a corner where I could find no way out, I had zero options, and I was forced to my knees, and the only prayer I knew was the Lord's Prayer, because I learned it in AA. And I said, that's the prayer that I used, because I didn't know how to talk to God either. I hadn't talked to God in a really long time, and frankly, there was some stuff that he didn't know about. So when I got on my knees, I assume. So when I got on my knees, that experience for me was, what I would call, that was my dark night of the soul, where I had no hope. And I didn't know how to talk to God, but I knew that was probably the only way out that I had. And so I said the Lord's Prayer during that time, and because I didn't have a good prayer. I didn't have a good enough prayer for God, so I just used the one from the book. My evangelical full gospel upbringing had taught me that prayer was instructions. When the disciples asked Christ, "How do we pray?" he said like this. And so I decided that was probably a good enough place to start. I'm really grateful for you guys for teaching me those basic tools, because even though that seed was planted many, many years ago when I was not interested in hearing your solution, it became that thing that was there when I was at my turning point, when I was at my lowest point. And then to be able to still use those basic tools when someone calls me and says, I'm scared, I don't know how to pray, but I really need help. And I go back to that toolkit and I use what you guys taught me. So thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for having me. There we go. Okay.